There is a place in Arizona where you can stand on a rim and look at nearly 2 billion years of this planet's history, stacked in order, in daylight from a car park. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, up to 18 miles wide, and over a mile deep, 6,093 feet at its deepest. It is not the deepest canyon on Earth. The Kaligandaki Gorge in Nepal is far deeper. What makes this one extraordinary is not the hole. It is what the hole exposes. The rock at the rim is Kaibab Limestone, about 270 million years old, laid down in a shallow sea in the Permian, before the dinosaurs existed. The rock at the bottom of the inner gorge is Vishnu Schist, around 2 billion years old, dark, hard, contorted, and formed deep in the roots of a mountain range that no longer exists. Between those two rocks, in the walls, is the readable history of a continent, seas advancing and retreating, deserts, swamps, coastlines, and one enormous unsettling gap. Most of that rock formed below sea level. All of it is now a mile above it. That is the first thing the canyon tells you: the ground moves. The Colorado Plateau, the whole region, was lifted 5,000 to 10,000 feet, starting about 65 million years ago. The river did not dig down so much as the land pushed up into it. And people have been here the whole time it has mattered. Native Americans have inhabited the Colorado River basin for at least 8,000 years, built settlements within the canyon and its caves, and the Pueblo peoples considered it a holy place and made pilgrimages to it. The first European known to have seen it was Garcia Lopez de Cardenas in 1540. His party tried to reach the river, failed, and left. 3 centuries later, in 1869, 10 men in 4 wooden boats set out to run the river through it, without maps, without knowing what was downstream, and without any way out. The expedition was led by John Wesley Powell, and it launched from Green River Station in Wyoming Territory on the 24th of May, 1869. 2 weeks earlier, the Golden Spike had been driven at Promontory Summit, completing the first transcontinental railroad. The railway carried the boats, the instruments, and 10 months of rations to the launch point. 4 boats, specially built in Chicago by the boat builder Thomas Bagley. The pilot boat, Emma Dean, 16 feet of pine, named for Powell's wife. 3 freight boats of 21 feet, built from oak. It went wrong early. On the Green River, they lost one of the freight boats, the No Name. At a rapid they named Disaster Falls. Nobody was killed, but they lost crucial supplies, including all of the expedition's barometers. That matters more than it sounds. The barometers were Powell's only way to measure altitude, and altitude was the whole point. Knowing his elevation let him make usable maps, and, because the elevation at the end of the journey was known, it let him estimate how much vertical drop was still ahead of them, how much river was left to fall. They recovered some of the barometers from the wreck. And they kept going, naming the country as they went: Flaming Gorge, the Gates of Lodore, Glen Canyon. Of the 10 men who set out, 6 finished. On the 6th of July, at a resupply stop, Frank Goodman left, saying he had had more than enough adventure. He lived some years with the Paiutes, then settled in Utah, married, and raised a family. The other 3 departures are darker. On the 28th of August, 2 days from the expedition's intended destination, Ornell Howland, his brother Seneca, and Bill Dunn left, believing they could not survive the river much longer. Seneca was a favorite of the group, soft-spoken and good-natured, and he wanted to stay. He went with his brother. They climbed out of the canyon and were never seen again. Historians still dispute what happened to them. One account holds they were killed by Shivwood's people in a case of mistaken identity. Another says they were executed by Mormons who took them for government spies investigating the Mountain Meadows massacre. Powell later interviewed Shivwood's leaders himself and was told they had been mistaken for prospectors. 2 days. The men who left were 2 days from the end. The 6 who stayed came out at the mouth of the Virgin River, having made the first recorded passage of the entire canyon, and the first thorough scientific and cartographic survey of it. Powell went back in 1871 and 72 and published his account in 1875, reissued in 1895. It is still read as a classic of American exploration writing. It is worth knowing who Powell was, because the expedition makes more sense once you do, and because the full picture is not entirely comfortable. He was born in 1834 in Mount Morris, New York, the son of a poor itinerant preacher who had emigrated from Shrewsbury in England 3 years earlier. His father wanted him in the ministry and disapproved of his interest in natural science. Powell pursued it anyway, and pursued it in a way that tells you everything about him. In 1855, he spent 4 months walking across Wisconsin. In 56, he rode the Mississippi from Minnesota to the sea. In 57, he rode the Ohio River from Pittsburgh to the Mississippi. In 58, he did the Illinois, then the Mississippi and the Des Moines into central Iowa. In 1859, at 25, he was elected to the Illinois Natural History Society. He had studied at 3 colleges over 7 years while teaching and never managed to finish a degree. In 1860, on a lecture tour, he became convinced a civil war was coming and started studying military science and engineering to prepare for it. He enlisted as a private in May 1861 and was commissioned a second lieutenant a month later. In November, he took a brief leave to marry Emma Dean. At the Battle of Shiloh, in the act of giving the order to fire, he was struck by a Minié ball and lost most of his right arm. The raw nerve endings caused him pain for the rest of his life. He went back to the army. He was at Champion Hill, at Big Black River Bridge, and at the Siege of Vicksburg, where, being Powell, he spent his time in the trenches studying rocks. He commanded an artillery brigade in the Atlanta campaign, fought at Nashville, and finished the war a brevet lieutenant colonel, though he preferred to be called major, and everyone did. Then a professorship of geology, a curatorship, 2 expeditions into the Rockies, including the first recorded ascent of Long's Peak in 1868, and a winter camped on the White River. Emma was on those expeditions too. She climbed Pikes Peak with him in the summer of 1867. During that winter on the White River, he made excursions down both rivers and spent days and nights in the camps of the Ute, compiling a vocabulary of their language at the request of the Smithsonian. That was the preparation. A one-armed man in constant pain who had rode most of the rivers of the Midwest taught himself geology and asked people for their words. After the canyon, he ran things. Appointed by President Garfield, he served as second director of the United States Geological Survey from 1881 to 1894. 2 years before that, he had become the first director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian, and he published an influential classification of North American Indian languages. And he proposed policies for the arid West that were startlingly prescient, an accurate reading of how little water that country actually has, made at a time when almost nobody wanted to hear it. Now, the uncomfortable part, which belongs in the same breath. Powell was a proponent of a then-fashionable theory of human progress in fixed stages, and he regarded Native Americans as culturally savage or barbarian. He advocated the overthrow of indigenous societies, the replacement of native hunting practices with sedentary agriculture, and cultural assimilation into the United States. The same man recorded Ute vocabulary at the Smithsonian's request, sat down with Shivwits leaders to find out what had happened to his men, and worked to erase the cultures he was documenting. People are not tidy. The canyon he surveyed is a masterpiece of 19th century science, and the policies he argued for did real harm, and both of those are true. But the thing Powell noticed in 1869 that mattered most is not a rapid or a landmark, it is a line. Below the line, dark, hard, contorted rock standing on end. Above it, flat, orderly sandstone lying across the top like a tablecloth, and between them, nothing. Not nothing, in the sense of a thin layer. Nothing in the sense that the rock recording an enormous span of time simply is not there. Powell called it the Great Unconformity, and it is one of the most consequential observations in the history of geology. Here is what that line means. Rock was laid down. Then it was pushed up into mountains. Then those mountains were eroded away, down to their roots. Then the sea came back and laid new rock across the stumps. The line is the old land surface. You are looking at the ground from a time before anything with a skeleton existed, with the next chapter resting directly on top of it. How much time is missing depends on where you stand, and the numbers are staggering. In one part of the canyon, the gap is about 175 million years. Where the same surface truncates a deeper formation, the gap grows to around 725 million years. And where the young sandstone rests directly on the ancient basement rock, the missing interval runs to somewhere between 1.2 and 1.6 billion years. More than 1 billion years of Earth's history, absent from a wall you can walk up to and touch. It is not local. Powell's Great Unconformity is part of a continent-wide surface that extends across Laurentia, the ancient core of North America. There is a fine piece of historical injustice attached to it. The same unconformity had been recognized 12 years before Powell's expedition by John Newbery in New Mexico on the Ives expedition of 1857-58. His work did not become widely known because the American Civil War intervened. What that surface records is a continent being scraped bare. A long period of widespread erosion stripped down the Precambrian rocks, exposed them and weathered them at the surface, and then a shallow sea moved in and buried the lot. You can see the same relationship at Frenchman Mountain in Nevada, where 550 million-year-old sandstone lies directly on 1.7 billion-year-old basement in a road accessible exposure that appears in half the textbooks. Above the unconformity, the canyon becomes a straightforward document, and it says the same thing over and over. The sea came, and the sea went. Below it, in the tilted rocks, is the Grand Canyon supergroup. 9 formations laid down between about 1.2 billion and 740 million years ago. Those formed in a rift, a place where the continent was being pulled apart and failed to split. The sunken region flooded, and a shallow seaway ran from what is now Lake Superior to Montana to Arizona. Above the unconformity, the record is mostly warm shallow seas, beaches, and swamps as a coastline advanced and retreated across the edge of a proto-North America again and again and again. And then, in the Permian, something completely different, the Coconino Sandstone, which is full of the signature wind-blown dunes. Those sweeping internal curves are the faces of sand dunes, frozen in stone. For that stretch of time, this place was a desert, a Sahara, sitting on top of a drowned coastline. The canyon does not just record a sequence of environments. It records that a single place on Earth can be a seafloor, a beach, a swamp, and a desert, and then a mile-high plateau, which is the real lesson of the wall. Not that the Earth is old, though it is. That the Earth is unrecognizably changeable and keeps the receipts. Now the argument. The rocks are easy. The canyon itself is the hard part, and geologists have been fighting about it for more than 150 years. The classic answer is 5 to 6 million years, and it has a clean mechanism behind it. About 5.3 million years ago, the Gulf of California opened. That gave the river a much lower place to end. It dropped its base level, dropped the bottom end of a river, and it cuts down faster all the way upstream. On that model, nearly all of the canyon's current depth was cut by about 1.2 million years ago, helped by Ice Age weather, which put more water into the drainage. Then the dating techniques improved, and the story stopped being clean. In 2008, Victor Polyak's team dated calcite deposits on the walls of 9 caves near the canyon using uranium and lead, and put their origins at about 17 million years ago. The same year, Rebecca Flowers used a different method, measuring helium in the mineral apatite to work out when rock cooled as it approached the surface, and concluded parts of the canyon were near their modern depth, around 20 million years ago. In 2012, she went further, suggesting the western part of the canyon might be as old as 70 million years. 70 million years puts part of this canyon in the age of dinosaurs, and that claim caused exactly the controversy you would expect, because it departed sharply from a well-supported consensus. The emerging resolution is more interesting than either side of that fight. The canyon is not one canyon, it is several segments cut at different times, which later joined up. The Hurricane segment formed 50 to 70 million years ago. The eastern Grand Canyon was cut 15 to 25 million years ago. And Marble Canyon and the westernmost end, the two ends of the modern canyon, were carved in the last 5 to 6 million years. So the Old River and Young River camps were both looking at real evidence from different pieces of the same whole. And the river had interruptions. Between about 3 million and 100,000 years ago, volcanic activity poured lava into the canyon, at times damming the Colorado completely. Those volcanic rocks are the youngest in the canyon. A river that has been cutting for millions of years, blocked by lava more than once, and cutting through it again. Step back and consider what this place actually is. It is an accident of erosion that happens to be a perfect cross-section through a continent's basement. Nearly 2 billion years, exposed in order at a scale a person can walk down into, and a mile-deep trench cut into it so you can see the sides. Every one of those layers records an environment. The fossils change as you descend. The chemistry changes. The color changes. And the layers stay in order because that is what layers do. That is why this canyon is not merely a spectacle. It is an instrument, and it is the instrument that taught a great many people what deep time actually means. And the single most instructive thing in it is the absence. Not the 2 billion years of rock, but the billion-plus years of missing rock in the middle of it. Because the missing time is not a failure of the record. It is a record of its own, of mountains that rose and were removed entirely, of a continent worn flat, of a sea that came back and started the story again. Powell saw that line in 1869 from a wooden boat in the middle of a journey that had already cost him boats, instruments, and 4 of his men. He was not the first to see it, and he knew he was not the first to run a river. What he did was write it down, map it, and hand it to everyone who came after. 2 days from the end of that journey, 3 of his men decided the river would kill them, climbed out, and walked into a story nobody has ever finished. The canyon they left is still being cut. The plateau is still rising. The river is still working. And the line is still there at the bottom where 1 billion years used to be.